Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about Tier 8 Goddess of Hunting Farming. Now you might have at some point looked through the auction house and look at certain unique items in this game and kind of just like gleaned over these absurd prices and wondered who the hell can actually afford these. How do you buy something like a butterfly hunting or a space rift for your slate setup? And the answer to that is people who farm Path of the Brave all day. There's people who flip. And there's people who do something similar to what I will show you today. And don't get me wrong, there's a ton of other strats you can also do, but this is one of those that has been proven over time. And this strat revolves around Goddess of Hunting. Now, you might have at some point in some kind of stream seen something similar to what I'm about to show you, a certain loot explosion from the boss. Usually it revolves around having two bosses actually. And I just want to tell you how to actually get there. Now, if you look at this, that's a ton of FE. Looks fancy, but there's quite a few pieces to this that you have to set up before you can get something like this. Now, one thing that you have to understand, though, is that this will be pretty hard to do. You have to understand the difficulty. You need a build that does 1 billion plus damage. Now, this season, there's a ton of OP builds that can do it. There is the new Bing. There is Thea. There's a ton of builds out there, but in general, you need a extremely efficient build already. So that is why this is not really a strat that you can do from the get-go. If you want to do a farming strat that you can do with whatever, then check out my other video about tier 7 farming. I'll link it down in the description. One thing that you have to understand with this kind of thing is this is not just a small leap from tier 7. I understand that you probably just reached tier 7s, right? And then on the lower bottom left, actually you can't even see it right now. Let me put myself to the side. Down here, you can actually change it. You click on this and then you do activate and all of a sudden all your maps are on tier 8. The problem is this jump is insane. So the jump from tier 6 to tier 7 is nothing compared to it. We're talking 10 times, 20, 30 times as hard. This is aspirational content and should be seen as such. In terms of defenses, you shouldn't die all the time, but it can happen. Tier 8s are so damn rippy, especially since the last changes. It is quite hard to never die. Something you can definitely do is get a cheat death into your build. For example, one thing you can do if you're already God of War, you probably already have this, but I just want to point it out. Determined is extremely strong. Basically, you can die once every 8 seconds. And then if you have a guttural drowned in your build, you already have a huge upside as well. This prevents severe injuries from being fatal. The next thing is your build also has to be incredibly fast. So if you're an attack-based build, you already have a way to get around. If you're a different build, you have to kind of manage that. Somehow, the faster you are, the more money you will make. And then there's the last component, which is definitely pets. This will give you a ton more drop rate, and this really, really helps in tier 8s. If you have stuff that gives you extra flame fuel, that is all the better. If you have Happy Chonky, if you have Cloud Gatherer, that's huge. And as a third one, if you happen to randomly pull a unique, that's great. But otherwise, just anything that gives you extra drop quantity. And this is another difficulty setting on top because you need a build that deals 1 billion plus damage without the help of your pact system. But let's talk about my card setup. Benevolent is king. The thing that makes everything possible in tier 8 farming is this card right now, which is by a mile the best card currently in the game. It's completely broken, enjoy it while it lasts. Flame Fuel dropped, have a 9% chance to be upgraded. I want to make this clear from the clip again. This does not just mean single flame sand will be transformed. This means whole stacks. So for example, if you see up here, you can kind of see it. There is actually a 6 stack of flame elementium back there. And that is because it can upgrade whole stacks of flame sand. So that is incredibly important. If you don't have this card, there is no strat. Now, sometimes you just won't get this card though, so that is why we also use Reserve. This removes a card from the plane, which is not that big of a deal, and you only run this card whenever you don't have Benevolent to get it from your deck. Now, the combo here is that you pair Benevolent with Perception. What Perception does is that whenever you get a Goddess of Hunting trial, there's a 75% chance to replicate a boss. So 3 out of 4 times you will get double bosses, and so you basically get double rewards. If you have this Awakened, then it's actually 100%. Then we have Generous, which is really important. 18% chance for rare monsters to drop 2 additional flame fuels. We'll have a lot of rare monsters in our map, why we're going to talk about in a second. But basically, this one has Inheritance 5, so if you run it as your first one, you'll have it for 5 maps throughout your whole run, which is very strong. Now, then we have some other support cards. One thing I want you to understand is that these goddesses, right, Goddess of Hunting, God of War, God of Machines, these are so much better on tier 8 than tier 7. They have like 5 to 10 times the loot, so if you've already done them on tier 7 and they didn't seem that good, just trust me, they're incredible in tier 8s. Now we're using the God of War card, but we're not really using it for God of War itself. Sure, it makes you a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, you drop a little bit at the end, but it's also for this extra drop quantity whenever you reach a new stage. Drop quantity nowadays is really hard to get, so that is huge. While you're in God of War, you get a lot of bonuses to your other mechanics. And then we have God of Machines. This is basically kind of like a lottery ticket. If you get gear, just skip it. But if you get currency, for example, it's going to rain. Not as hard as with Goddess of Hunting, but pretty similar. You also have free waves, so that is really strong. Other than this, I have here Just, which removes one trait card from the plane and awakens two, so you can awaken stuff like Benevolent. I usually don't run this card because it's a little bit risky. I don't want to remove my Benevolent. The reason I run it is if you actually get the awakened version of this, you don't remove a card and you awaken two cards on the plane, which is kind of the GG. So it doesn't happen as often, but I still think that for the occasional times where it does happen, it's worth it. And then at the end here, I have Regretful and Pity, which gives me stage attention points rewards just to get to the boss quicker. Now, you can put in here whatever you want, maybe pirates or whatever. These are the least important ones. This is basically just if I don't get Benevolent, I have something else to run. Now, how do you actually run it? Now, I've done this on stream over on twitch.tv/Palsteron over countless days, but I can basically link you the VOD down below if you actually want to check it out for yourself, whatever you want to. I have it basically in certain plans depending on what falls on your board. The most important thing though before we start is you should never do a tier 8 map if you don't have Benevolent on it. While tier 7 maps are really cheap, tier 8 maps are not. They're around about 1 for 3 FE. So you better choose wisely what you do with them, otherwise you're actually going to lose money. Tier 8s in general are really rewarding, but there's just no reason to kind of do your setup maps before, right? So, for example, what I mean by setup maps, those are all the maps that don't have Benevolent in them. Once you have Benevolent, it's going to start spewing Flame Elementiums. And without it, you have a really weak map. So before you get Benevolent, the first 2 maps that you run will always be in tier 7s because they basically cost nothing. This is what you call the setup maps. So let's just go through it together. The plan A, if it's GG, is you're first going to run either Generous or Fearless. The reason you run these first is because they have Inheritance 5. Now, Inheritance 5 actually means it stays for the map you just run and then 5 more maps. But since we only have 5 rotations, it basically stays for 5 maps. So that's why you usually use them first. Between those two, Generous is usually stronger. And this first map is a setup map because it doesn't have Benevolent in it. We're going to run Benevolent later because one thing you have to understand is Benevolent has Inheritance 2, so it's only going to last for 3 maps, including the map that you run it with. So you don't want to just start out with it, you want to ramp up to it. So now that you run a tier 7 with Generous or Fearless, it's going to stay for the rest of the rotation. Second up, you really want Perception. Perception, once again, is the card that has this, and it has Inheritance 3, so it stays for 4 maps. So if you do it second, it's going to last for the whole rotation. And then as a third map, you're going to use Benevolent, and it's going to start raining Flame Elementiums. As for how you want to juice your maps, right here, you can juice your map with Netherrealm Resonators. This costs quite a bit if you want to ramp it up to 100, which is what you want to do in this strat, but only with the maps, once again, that have Benevolent on it. All the other ones are basically whatever. So in tier 7s, don't even think about this, but in tier 8s, you want to juice this up, and you want to juice it up to full, which is quite expensive and quite a bit of investment. So as you can see here, it goes up exponentially. It just cost 8, 16, and now we are actually at 100. And if, just so you know, 20 of these are worth 1 FE. So just into this, you're going to pump 2 FE worth of resonators. Not only does this give you a ton of drop quantity and rarity, it also makes the map a ton more difficult. So this will be like 5-6 times as hard as a normal tier 8 map. But what you also get is an absurd amount of rare monsters, and in this case 38. And don't forget that if you have Generous on your map, that will mean all of these will basically just absolutely shit out these extra additional flame fuels, which then have a chance to get converted. So 100 drop quantity, and then in terms of Scarab, you want to do the following. Since you have Perception on it, you want to use a Goddess of Hunting Scarab. These are quite expensive. They right now cost 7 to 8 FE per. So only use them when you have Perception and Benevolent both on the map. Then you want to use one of these here and the other flame fuel compasses as well for this setup here. Now, if instead of Generous as your first one, you actually had Fearless, meaning you have extra buffs whenever you have a God of War, what you can also do and probably should do here is instead of this one right here, chunk in right here the Goddess of War compass. So then your setup would look something like these two goddesses and then the two highest flame fuel compasses you have. Now there's also a compass even higher in terms of flame fuel. They cost 5 FE each. These three together, right? Like this one here, and this one here, they cost like 1 FE, all three combined, which is not that big of a deal. But the really high one that also has a chance to duplicate your FEs costs like 5 to 6 FE per. So only use them if you actually have Awakened stuff. And then for the last two maps, basically you got everything set up that you want to, but you can obviously add extra stuff. Maybe you got Tolerant in there. Maybe you had both Generous and Fearless. So first you ran Generous, and now as one of the last maps, you can also add Fearless on top. Whatever you want to round it out with, or maybe you got a random Chaos card that's decent. But in general, these are not as important. As for Plan B, this is basically if you do not get your Benevolent, which in this case I didn't get right here. What do you do in that case? In that case, you're first going to run Reserve. Now you have a chance to fish out your Benevolent, and if you do, you can basically proceed. You just now wasted your first run, right? Which is fine. You're just going to have to do Perception immediately in case you get it. And there it goes. Perception into Benevolent. Once again, our 2-card combo, and then you can do whatever floats your boat with the rest of the cards. In this case, nothing's really changed in terms of what setup you do. You still want to completely juice up to 100%, and you're still going to use the compasses of whatever gods you have enhanced on your map. And never leave a spot open here. Always fill it out with whatever extra flame fuel compasses you have. And you never want to use more than 2 of these god compasses, because then you're going to miss out on a lot of these flame fuel stuff. For example, here, 41% additional flame fuel. That is a more multiplier. So these two plans, pretty easy. The only difference is that in one case, you don't have Benevolent right away, and you're just going to fish with Reserved for it. In Plan A, you already have everything lined up. But what happens in other scenarios? Sometimes you get Benevolent, but all your support cards aren't really there. In that case, what you're going to do is you're just going to use Benevolent normally. Probably you don't have Perception, maybe you don't even have Fearless and stuff like that. Just fill out whatever you want. Just make sure in the third map you run Benevolent. You don't have to invest as much into these maps. You still always want to go 100 drop quantity, but in this case, you can, for example, also only go for flame fuel compasses. These are always worth it. So that is Plan C, pretty easy. Fill with any good cards, Benevolent, and then question mark. Question mark doesn't really matter. Benevolent will always give you some amount of returns. And then Plan D, what if you have no Benevolent? So for example, you just don't have Benevolent and you don't have Reserved, or you use Reserve first and you actually don't get your Benevolent. In that case, what you do is you're going to run it down, as I call it. So you go to tier 7s, which are worth nothing, and you open Twisted Valley. This is, in my opinion, in this certain area. You can run this in any area you want. For me personally, I really like Blistering Lava. Twisted Valley is a really, really fast map. So if you go in here, this is basically the map that is in the middle going to have the boss. So you go up here. Now, usually it wants to send you around, but we're doing tier 7. We're just going to run it down here, and the boss is already, and we're done. This is like a 10-second map or even lower, depending on how fast you are. You portal out, do this 5 times, and you hope for your next rotation. Since tier 7s are absurdly cheap, this didn't really cost you anything other than like 1 or 1.5 minutes. And I want to make this clear because it's easy to kind of make money whenever you get exactly the cards that you want. But if you don't, here is where a lot of people go astray and just do some weird stuff instead of just immediately resetting and going for your good starts again. Other good maps to do this with in other regions is, for example, in Glacial Abyss over here, Demiman Village is incredibly fast. In Steel Forge, it was, I think, Beast Plains or Cloud Walls are incredibly fast. If you're in Thunder Waste, I would do Grove of Calamity. And honestly, Voidlands, all of these maps are pretty clunky. They have really good map count, but I would personally stay away from Voidlands. All right, now in terms of what rewards you want, your number 1 priority will be currency, and currency looks like this. Your number 2 reward will be compasses, and it will look like this. Now, compasses are pretty damn comparable to currency. You will drop a ton of them, and some of them are worth like 4 to 5 FE. On average, I've still found it to be a little bit worse than these because you have Benevolent, which makes it, you're going to transform into a lot of FE. Be warned, fluorescent memories are not that strong. They got nerfed quite a bit. So do not use these unless you have to. Now, in my experience, you will get some kind of currency reward, I would say around about 70 to 80% of the time. And if that doesn't happen, sometimes you get compasses, and if you don't get any, you just get screwed. Sometimes it will happen. But yeah, fluorescent memories, I guess, is your third thing. You never want gear. Gear is basically the one where you just have swords here. However, sometimes, very rarely, you will get legendary gear. So just to make this clear, this is gear. You never want to take this. This is the worst reward by far. It's completely useless. Never take it unless there's literally no other options. But if you have gear with a star right here, that means legendaries. As for legendaries, I think over a huge span of maps, you would probably be better than even currency with Benevolent. Just be warned, that is a complete gamble. Probably 9 out of 10 times you will get absolutely nothing, but maybe that one time you will get a legendary that's worth like 300 plus FE. That's up to you if you want to gamble or not. As for reward amount, this one matters quite a bit. One of these rewards means pretty flaccid, not that strong. 2 means a lot better, and 3 is obviously the big reward. Just know that these are quite interesting. So for example, if you only have 1 currency reward right here versus, let's say, 3 compass reward, I would actually probably pick the compass reward. So these do matter, but in general, you still almost always want to go for the extra flame elementium. Now, important to note here, and this is going to piss some people off because they're going to say, oh, cube is pretty damn good in tier 8s. I can tell you from personal experience, trying it with and without, the cube is a waste of time once you have a character that is strong enough to do a strategy like this. Don't get me wrong, it sounds like free money, but if you realize how many more of these maps and how many more of these loot explosions you could have in that time, if you have this set up correctly, you're actually going to lose money per hour doing the cube. However, that doesn't mean we're still not profiting from it, because we're actually redoing our avarice code, and we go full left side right here, and this is going to give us a ton of extra mobs, which are then also going to drop extra currency. Important to note here, and I don't know if I'm just being crazy about this, Party of Sin, for me it feels like whenever I trigger this into Malice Incarnations, all my mobs will be Malice Incarnations, and I feel like I'm dropping less currency. This could just be me going crazy. It could be a bug. Whatever. You can try it out yourself if you want to, but I do not use this. And the second thing here is Avatar of Desire. Personally, my character cannot live through this boss. I have around about 5-ish billion DPS, and it's still quite tanky. This will just one-shot me randomly, so I absolutely hate this boss. It's definitely worth running if you have the character power to run it on a tier 8 with this much extra juice. I personally actually respect it because it took me too much time. In that time, my God of War fell off and stuff like that. So just go for all of these nodes that give you extra mobs. So yeah, that's basically about it. If you want to afford some of these high ticket items, I know it can feel gruesome, but it's something where your build is going to play a huge role. You have to know what you're farming, and over time, you're going to accumulate the knowledge to do this. In my first league, I did not do stuff like this. This is something you will ramp up to. So don't despair if you can't do it this league. If your build is not up to par for this and you don't have enough time to farm for it, over time, you'll get the grip for it. And yeah, with that said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.